Black CEO, mocked by Billionaire family minutes. Later, he canceled their $50 merger. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. In the luxurious ballroom of a sprawling estate, the glittering chandeliers cast a soft glow on the polished floors. The sound of murmured conversations and clinking glasses fills the air. At the center of the room stands a man, dressed in a simple, understated suit. He is a black CEO, one of the most influential figures in the business world, but tonight, he is just another guest in a sea of elites. As he walks past the family of a billionaire mogul, a cold, dismissive stare is thrown his way. "You don't belong here," a voice calls out, loud enough for everyone to hear. The words sting, cutting through the air like a sharp blade. But the CEO does not flinch. He merely turns, locking eyes with the speaker, his composure unshaken. This moment will change everything. Just minutes later, he will wield a power no one saw coming. A power so immense, it will make them regret every word they just uttered. Want to know how? Keep watching. What happens next is something you'll never forget. The room remained eerily quiet after the black CEO's declaration, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a thick fog. The billionaire family, once so confident in their control over the deal, now found themselves at a loss for words. They stared at him, their eyes wide with disbelief and a hint of fear creeping into their expressions. The CEO, unshaken, stood tall, his posture unwavering, as though the decision had already been made long before this meeting. He had given them a chance to respect him, to acknowledge his power, and now they would feel the consequences of their dismissive attitudes. The assistant by his side stepped forward, her demeanor just as calm as his. "Start the protocol," he instructed in a low, commanding voice. The assistant nodded and began typing quickly on her tablet, sending out a series of urgent messages to the top legal and financial teams. This was not just a power play. This was a calculated move, a moment of reckoning for the family that had dared to belittle him. As the CEO watched the screen of his tablet light up with responses, he could feel the growing sense of justice beginning to unfold. His mind was sharp, focused on the details that had been overlooked in their arrogance. He had seen these kinds of moves before, the underestimation of a person based on their appearance, their background, their race. But he had never let such dismissals define him. He had built this empire from the ground up, against the odds, and now it was time to remind the world of that. His hand hovered over the phone on his desk as he waited for confirmation from his legal team. With a swift motion, he hit send, and within moments, the merger deal that had been the focus of so many board meetings and countless hours of negotiation was officially canceled. The family's smirks began to falter as the room's atmosphere shifted. The power dynamic that had been so firmly in their favor moments ago was now reversed, and they were powerless to stop it. Their shock was palpable, their minds scrambling to understand what had just happened. The patriarch of the family, a man in his late 60s with a face carved from years of wealth and privilege, finally spoke, his voice shaking. "You can't do this," he said, his words a mixture of confusion and anger. "This deal is worth $50 billion. The CEO's gaze did not falter as he met the man's eyes, his voice as steady as ever. $50 billion, yes, but it was built on the backs of people like me, people who you thought would never get the chance to stand in this room. It's not just a business deal to me. It's a matter of respect." The patriarch opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. Their wealth, their influence, their legacy, none of it mattered now. They had made one fatal mistake, one that would cost them far more than they could have ever imagined. As the room grew tense, the assistant glanced at the CEO and whispered, "The media is starting to pick up on it." A smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He had expected this. The world was watching, and they would witness every moment of this power shift. "Good," he said quietly. "Let them watch. Let them see what happens when you try to push someone to the edge." The CEO turned to face the family once more, his expression calm but his eyes sharp with purpose. You have a choice, he continued. You can either acknowledge this as a turning point, or you can continue to ignore the truth and watch as your empire crumbles. The choice is yours. As the words left his mouth, the weight of the moment hung over everyone in the room. The once untouchable family, now stripped of their power and pride, realized they had underestimated him in the most devastating way possible. But for the Black CEO, this was just the beginning. He had made his point, and now he would take steps to ensure that this moment of injustice would never be forgotten. The CEO stood at the head of the conference room table, his eyes scanning the faces of the once powerful billionaire family, now reduced to mere bystanders in the wake of his decision. The patriarch of the family, visibly sweating, sat frozen, unable to comprehend the situation unfolding before him. His children, who had spent their lives accustomed to winning, now looked like lost children, their previous arrogance gone. The CEO's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with their panic, and his voice cut through the thick tension. You've had your chance to respect me, to see me as a partner, not just as someone to be used and discarded. Now, you will face the consequences of your actions. He let the words sink in, savoring the moment as the silence in the room deepened. His assistant, standing at his side, quietly updated him on the situation, confirming that the news was already spreading like wildfire. The media, eager for the next big story, had already caught wind of the canceled merger and the dramatic shift in power. The CEO knew the stakes were higher now, and he had no intention of backing down. With a composed gesture, he signaled for his assistant to bring up the details of the next phase. The assistant quickly pulled up a set of files on her tablet, showing the steps that were already being taken to secure the CEO's dominance in the business world. We are initiating phase 2, she whispered, just loud enough for the family to hear. The patriarch looked at her, his face flushed with rage and disbelief. You're destroying everything, he said, his voice cracking under the pressure. Everything we've built, gone in an instant. The CEO took a step closer to the table, his gaze unyielding. What you built wasn't a legacy, it was a house of cards, built on the backs of those you thought would never rise up. Well, here I am. His words were not just an assertion of power, but a promise of change. The room seemed to shrink as the family realized the full scope of what had just happened. They had underestimated him. The assistant, with a small but determined smile, continued. The board is already in motion. The assets are being reallocated, and the investments will be redirected. We're going to make sure that no deal, no matter how big, will ever threaten the integrity of this company again. The patriarch tried to regain his composure, but it was clear that his empire was crumbling around him. You're making a huge mistake, he spat, his arrogance still lingering despite the situation. The CEO shook his head slowly. No. The mistake was thinking I would ever be just a pawn in your game. You mistook my silence for weakness, and now you'll see what happens when you challenge me. His voice was firm, resolute, and carried a weight that made it impossible for the family to challenge him further. The CEO turned his attention back to the documents, finalizing the steps that would ensure the family's downfall. As the assistant activated the final stage, the patriarch's face paled. The CEO's grip on the company was now unshakable, and with a final, quiet command, he dismissed the family from the room. You can leave now, and if you ever dare to question my place in this world again, remember this moment. The family stood, stunned, as they slowly left the room, their faces drawn and defeated. The CEO stood tall, watching them leave, knowing that this was only the beginning. The power shift was complete, and there was no going back. Outside, the world was already buzzing with the news of the collapse, but in that room, the CEO had already begun to rebuild his future, a future where respect would never again be given or taken lightly. As the billionaire family left the conference room, their heads hanging low, the CEO remained standing at the table, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. The assistant, still by his side, couldn't help but feel a sense of pride at how swiftly and decisively everything had unfolded. But the CEO was already thinking about the next move. He wasn't just taking down an arrogant family, he was setting the stage for something much bigger, something that would shake the foundations of the business world. He walked to the window, gazing out at the city skyline, his mind racing. The family had tried to use him, dismiss him, and treat him like a token player in their game. They didn't understand the kind of power he wielded, the kind of influence that could bring them to their knees in mere minutes. Is everything set? the CEO asked, his voice low but intense. The assistant nodded, her fingers moving quickly over her tablet. Phase 2 is complete. The assets are already being restructured, and the media is all over the story. It's spreading faster than we expected. The CEO smiled, but it wasn't a smile of satisfaction. It was a smile of anticipation, the calm before the storm. Good. Let them watch, he said. Let them see the true power of influence, not just in business, but in the world. He turned away from the window, his gaze now focused on the next step of his plan. He had built his empire from the ground up, fought through every obstacle, and endured every slight. Now, it was time to make sure no one ever underestimated him again. He sat back down at the table, pulling up a new set of documents. This wasn't just about the family. This was about sending a message to the entire industry. The CEO was in control now. Prepare for the next round, he instructed. We move on the financial front. This merger might be gone, but there are other opportunities, bigger ones, waiting for us. The assistant raised an eyebrow. What about them? She asked, motioning toward the now absent family. The CEO's face hardened. We don't just let people like that get away with anything. They made their move. Now it's our turn. Make sure their names are on every list of failed mergers, every audit, every review. We'll make sure they never forget what it feels like to be at the mercy of someone who's been underestimated. His words were cold, calculating, but there was a fire in his eyes that told a different story. This wasn't just business. This was personal. The CEO had taken everything they had thrown at him and turned it into fuel for his rise. The tables had turned, and now he would make sure the world knew who had the power. Let's make sure they don't get a second chance, he continued, his voice unwavering. Their legacy will be one of arrogance and failure. And mine will be one of resilience, strategy, and respect. The assistant nodded, already moving to implement the next steps. The CEO leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. He wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. The world was watching, and he would make sure they saw the full extent of his power. The business world was about to change, and he would be the one leading the charge. For now, it was time to let his actions speak louder than words. The following days passed in a blur of meetings, press conferences, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. The media frenzy surrounding the cancellation of the $50 billion merger had not died down. In fact, it had only intensified, and now the world was waiting for the next move. The CEO remained calm, focused, never wavering. His vision had been set in motion, and he was about to make his next move in a chess game that no one had even realized they were playing. His assistant had delivered the latest reports, showing that the billionaire family was scrambling to salvage their reputation, but the damage was done. Their once pristine image was tarnished, and the CEO had done it with nothing more than his voice and his influence. But he wasn't finished, not by a long shot. As he sat in his office, a quiet power enveloping him, he turned to his assistant. It's time, he said simply, the weight of his words settling in the room. Prepare the documents. The next phase is about to begin. His assistant, who had been by his side through every step of this journey, nodded with a knowing smile. She had seen the transformation, from a man who had been overlooked and dismissed to the force he had become. Everything is in place, she replied. The deals are set, the partnerships are secured, and we're ready to make our next move. The industry will be watching. The CEO stood, his posture straight and his expression determined. Good, let's make sure they don't forget this, he said. The world needs to see what happens when you challenge me. We're going to show them that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. His journey had never been easy, but it had shaped him into the man he was today. Every insult, every slight, every challenge had only fueled his resolve. The family had mocked him, but now he was the one who held all the power. He picked up the phone and dialed a number that would change everything. It's time, he said when the call was answered. Activate the plan. I want this deal to go live in the next 24 hours. His voice was steady, unwavering. We'll announce it tomorrow. Make sure the world knows who we are. The assistant moved swiftly, relaying his orders, confirming the final details. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. His company would not only survive, it would thrive. The next day, a press release hit the media, detailing a massive new acquisition. The CEO's company had just acquired a rival tech giant. a move that would shake the foundation of the industry. The deal was valued at $20 billion, a fraction of the canceled merger, but it was enough to send a clear message. The family had lost everything. The CEO had won. The media exploded with coverage, praising his strategic vision and unwavering leadership. But it wasn't just the business world that took notice. The public, who had watched the drama unfold, stood behind him, applauding the man who had refused to be silenced. It wasn't just about the money or the power. It was about respect. The CEO had proven that he would not be underestimated, that his voice and actions held far more weight than anything the billionaire family could offer. In the days that followed, more moves were made. The billionaire family's assets were frozen, their deals stalled, their reputation in tatters. The CEO, meanwhile, continued to build his empire, step by calculated step, knowing that every decision he made would be scrutinized, but he was prepared. He had made it this far by turning every challenge into an opportunity, and now the world was watching as he reshaped the industry on his terms. The aftermath of the CEO's announcement reverberated across the business world, sending shockwaves through every sector. The acquisition had not only cemented his position as a formidable leader, but it also sent a powerful message to anyone who had ever doubted his worth or underestimated his resolve. For the billionaire family, the consequences of their actions had been swift and unforgiving. Their empire, once built on the exploitation of power, was now crumbling, piece by piece, and they could do nothing to stop it. The CEO had taken every moment of mockery, every slight, every laugh at his expense, and turned it into fuel for this moment of reckoning. As the news of his strategic move spread, his name became synonymous with respect and resilience. The business world had no choice but to acknowledge his rise, and the media, once quick to question his worth, now praised his sharp intellect and unyielding determination. But despite the public admiration, the CEO knew that this was far from over. This victory, though monumental, was just one chapter in a much larger story. The family may have lost their grip on the industry, but the CEO knew that other challenges would arise. It was time to turn his attention to the next phase of his master plan. In the days following the announcement, he met with his closest advisors, reviewing every aspect of the company's future and identifying opportunities for further growth. The stakes had never been higher. "We need to expand quickly," he said during one of the meetings, his voice steady as he looked over the projections. "We've shown them what we're capable of. Now, we need to make sure we're positioned for long-term dominance." His advisors, once tentative in their suggestions, now spoke with the confidence of those who knew they were part of something much bigger than themselves. The CEO had given them a blueprint for success, and they were all ready to execute. "The market is changing," one of his senior executives said, "but we're ahead of the curve. If we make the right moves now, we can capture the biggest players before they even see us coming." The CEO nodded. "Exactly. And remember, it's not just about the money. It's about making sure that when people look at us, they see a company that doesn't just survive, but thrives, against all odds." The plan was set into motion almost immediately. Deals were signed, new partnerships were forged, and expansion plans were rolled out. The CEO's influence grew stronger by the day, and soon, his name was being spoken in the same breath as some of the most powerful figures in the business world. But behind the success, the CEO never lost sight of his original mission: to dismantle a system that had, for too long, allowed people like the billionaire family to thrive by exploiting others. His victory wasn't just personal. It was a statement that would resonate across industries for years to come. "This is just the beginning," he thought to himself as he reviewed the final set of contracts in his office late one evening. "We've only scratched the surface." The CEO had set the stage for a legacy that would outlast even the most powerful families in the business world, a legacy built not on wealth alone, but on the relentless pursuit of respect, fairness, and integrity. And with every decision, every action, he knew that he was rewriting the rules of the game, and no one would be able to ignore him again. As the weeks passed, the CEO's dominance in the business world only grew. His moves were calculated, each decision made with the precision of a chess master, anticipating the moves of his competitors before they even had the chance to make them. The media, once skeptical of his every step, now followed his every move with bated breath, eager to report on his next big success. The world had witnessed the billionaire family's downfall, and now, They were watching him rise to unprecedented heights. The CEO knew that the battle was far from over, however. His success had drawn attention, both from allies and adversaries. As his empire expanded, so did the number of people who wanted to either join him or take him down. There were those who admired him, who wanted to work alongside him and learn from his rise, but there were others, the powerful and the privileged, who felt threatened by his growing influence. To them, he represented a challenge to the established order, a disruption of the power dynamics that had been in place for generations. The CEO, though, wasn't concerned. He had seen this before, people who were too afraid to embrace change, who would rather fight to maintain the status quo than allow for the possibility of something better. As he sat in his office, reviewing new acquisition opportunities, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from his assistant, who had been with him through every step of this journey. "They're making their move," she said. The message was short, but it carried weight. The CEO knew exactly what it meant. His competitors, sensing the threat he posed, had begun to align themselves against him, trying to rally support to undermine his efforts. But he wasn't worried. He had anticipated this. He was always one step ahead. "Prepare the team," he said to his assistant, his voice steady, yet full of determination. "It's time to show them who's really in charge." The next day, an unexpected announcement hit the press. A major competitor, a company with decades of experience, had partnered with several other industry giants to create a coalition that was meant to rival the CEO's growing empire. They were coming for him, and they were coming fast. The headline screamed of the new power alliance that was going to take down the CEO's company. But the CEO, far from being intimidated, saw this as the perfect opportunity to solidify his position. He knew that the moment had arrived for him to make an even bolder move. "Let them think they're the ones in control," he said, his voice calm and confident. "It's time for us to take over." The very next week, he announced a new partnership, one that would send shockwaves through the industry. The CEO had secured the backing of several high-profile investors, people whose names carried weight and whose financial influence could not be ignored. The alliance he had formed was not just a counter to his competitors, it was a declaration that no one, no matter how powerful, could stand in his way. The press once again was left scrambling, unable to keep up with his every move. The CEO's company had just secured its place at the top, and the power dynamics had once again shifted in his favor. But he wasn't done yet. There was still more work to be done, more opportunities to seize, more obstacles to crush. As he sat in his office, watching the reactions unfold, he smiled to himself. The game was still being played, but now he was the one in control. The world would soon see that this was no longer just about business. This was about legacy, and his legacy would be one that no one could ever erase. As the weeks progressed, the CEO continued to solidify his position at the forefront of the business world. The strategic moves he had made, from the canceled merger to the bold new partnerships, had completely redefined the landscape. His competitors, once confident in their ability to maintain control, now found themselves scrambling, struggling to keep up with his relentless pace. It was as if he had become a force of nature, unstoppable and unpredictable. But even as he reveled in the success of his latest moves, the CEO knew that the true challenge was just beginning. The coalition that had formed to oppose him wasn't just an obstacle, it was a symbol of the entrenched power he had spent years working to dismantle. Every move he made was being scrutinized, every decision weighed against the possibility of failure. The stakes had never been higher. Sitting at his desk one evening, the CEO received another update from his assistant. "The opposition is getting more aggressive," she said. "They're pulling every lever they have to try and bring us down." The CEO leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he considered the news. He had expected this. The powerful figures who had once dismissed him, now threatened by his rise, were beginning to lash out. They were scared, and scared people made mistakes. "We'll let them make their move," the CEO said with a calm resolve. "But we'll be ready. This time, we turn the tables for good." The following week, in a stunning move that no one had anticipated, the CEO announced a new acquisition, one that would not only expand his empire, but would completely disrupt the balance of power in the industry. His company had purchased one of the largest competitors in the market, a move that made headlines across the globe. The press could hardly keep up with the speed of his success, and the industry was left reeling from the impact. This acquisition was more than just a business deal. It was a statement, a declaration that the CEO would not be stopped, no matter what forces tried to undermine him. The opposition had been foolish to think they could outmaneuver him. He had seen their every move before they made it. His next steps were already in motion, and this acquisition was the foundation for a future that no one could foresee. As the CEO addressed his board in the wake of the announcement, he could see the look of awe and admiration in their eyes. They had followed his lead, trusted in his vision, and now they were on the verge of something unprecedented. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "We've shown them that we are more than just a business. We are a force for change, and no one is going to stop us now." The room erupted in applause, but the CEO was already thinking beyond the applause. He had already mapped out the next phase of his plan. This was a world he had created, and now no one could take it from him. Outside, the world continued to buzz with excitement over the deal. The competition, once certain of their dominance, now found themselves scrambling for answers. But it was too late. The CEO had won, and the game had changed forever. His empire was built, not just on financial success, but on the indomitable power of his will, and no one could ever underestimate him again. As the dust settled from the CEO's latest acquisition, the industry was left in awe. His strategic moves had become the stuff of legend, the kind of business decisions that reshaped markets and changed the trajectory of entire industries. For the CEO, however, the thrill of success was fleeting. He knew that the real battle was not just about dominating the market or even proving his worth. It was about ensuring that the power he had fought so hard to gain was never taken from him. He had become the embodiment of resilience, but the forces that had tried to take him down were not done yet. He had no illusions. He had seen how quickly power could slip from one person to another. As he sat at his desk reviewing the latest reports, the numbers were good, the growth was undeniable, but the resistance was still there. His competitors, although weaker now, had not given up entirely. "They will never stop," the CEO muttered to himself, a grim realization creeping in. "But I won't stop either." He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped together, his mind racing. The family he had dismantled, the coalitions formed against him, they were all part of a larger system, one that had been built to maintain the status quo, to keep power in the hands of a few. The CEO had become a symbol of defiance, but he knew that true change required more than just taking down one family, more than just winning a single battle. It was about toppling the system itself, a system that had allowed men like the patriarch to rise while others were kept down. His resolve had only strengthened. He wasn't just building a business empire, he was building a new kind of power, one that was inclusive, transparent, and unyielding. But the opposition was relentless, and he knew they wouldn't wait for him to make his next move. They would strike first if given the chance. That night, as he sat in his office overlooking the city, he made a decision. "It's time to push forward," he said aloud, his voice echoing in the empty room. "Time to make it impossible for them to ignore us." The next morning, his team went to work. The CEO initiated a sweeping restructuring plan, one that would expand his influence even further, not just through acquisitions, but by securing strategic partnerships with key players in different industries. His vision was growing more ambitious by the day, and he could feel the momentum building. As the press continued to buzz with stories of his success, the CEO's presence in the business world was becoming undeniable. But his vision extended beyond wealth and power. He had never forgotten the racial prejudice he had faced on his journey to the top. It had been the spark that ignited his ambition, and now it was the force that drove him to change the rules. He was determined to build a company and a legacy that would be remembered not for its wealth, but for its ability to break down barriers. He had already proven that he could beat the system now. It was time to remake it. "We've only just begun," he said, standing up and walking towards the window. "This is about more than business. This is about reshaping the world." His assistant, who had become an invaluable ally, stood by his side. "What's the next step?" she asked. The CEO smiled, his eyes focused on the horizon. "We're going to lead, not just follow. We're going to show them how it's done." The game was far from over, and with every move he made, the CEO knew he was rewriting the rules of the business world on his terms. The CEO's strategy had begun to take shape in ways that no one, not even his most ardent supporters, could have predicted. His company's growth had reached new heights, but with every step forward, the pressure mounted. The more successful he became, the more determined his adversaries were to challenge him. and the more relentless the media became in dissecting his every move. He had expected this. In fact, he had planned for it. The higher you climb, the harder they try to knock you down. And yet, despite the continuous scrutiny, the CEO stood unwavering, focused on the larger goal. The battle was not just for dominance in business, it was a fight to dismantle the systems that had kept people like him out for so long. He had experienced firsthand the sting of being underestimated, ridiculed, and overlooked, and now he was determined to change that narrative, not only for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. "Let them watch," he often said to his team. "Let them watch as we build something they'll never see coming." The press coverage continued to swirl, with headlines speculating about his next move, but the CEO was always 2 steps ahead. He had already shifted the conversation, making it clear that his success was not about wealth or power, but about something far more valuable: respect. It was a message he was sending not just to his competitors, but to everyone who had ever faced prejudice, discrimination, or bias. As he prepared for the next phase of his expansion, the CEO knew that the world was watching. He had made it this far, but there was still more to be done. The changes he had started were just the beginning. His vision was evolving, and now it was time to turn his attention to another key player: diversity and inclusion. In a world where the most powerful positions were still predominantly held by those who fit a certain mold, he was determined to prove that the future of business didn't have to look like the past. He called a meeting with his top executives, and as they gathered around the conference table, he laid out his next big initiative. "We're not just going to be a company that takes up space in the industry," he said, his voice firm but passionate. "We're going to lead the way. We're going to show the world that diversity is our strength, and inclusivity is the future. It's time we build a team, a leadership team, that reflects the world we live in." The room fell silent as his words sank in. For many of his executives, this was uncharted territory. They had followed his lead up until now. But this new direction, this commitment to change on a cultural level, was different. It wasn't just about making deals or securing assets anymore. It was about something much deeper, the CEO continued. "If we're going to change the game, we need to change how we think, how we operate, and who we bring into the fold. Our success can't be measured only in dollars and cents. It has to be about making sure that every voice is heard and valued, regardless of who they are or where they come from." The executives nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was saying. For the CEO, this was a defining moment, not just in his career, but in his life. He had already overcome so much, but now he was about to shift the landscape in ways that no one would have ever imagined. His empire would not just be about wealth, it would be about creating a legacy that would echo for generations to come. A legacy built on integrity, respect, and the belief that true power lies in inclusivity. "This is bigger than any deal we've made," he added, his gaze unwavering. "This is about the future of business. This is about making sure that everyone has a seat at the table." As he finished speaking, the energy in the room shifted. His team understood. They were all in this together, not just for success, but for a future they could be proud of. The CEO had always been a man of action, but now he was becoming a beacon of change, a force that would redefine what it meant to be a leader in the business world. The weeks following the CEO's announcement were filled with both anticipation and a growing sense of urgency. The media had caught wind of his new initiative, and soon, stories began flooding the headlines, praising his bold vision for diversity and inclusion in the corporate world. His company, which had once been seen as just another powerful player, was now viewed as a trailblazer, leading the charge to redefine leadership and success. Yet, despite the overwhelming praise, the CEO knew the real work was only beginning. He had ignited a movement, but it was up to him and his team to ensure that the changes he had promised would actually come to fruition. As he sat in his office one morning reviewing the latest reports, his assistant came in with an update. "The diversity initiative is gaining traction," she said, "but we're starting to see some resistance. A few high-level executives are hesitant to embrace the changes." The CEO nodded thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the documents in front of him. He wasn't surprised. Change, especially at this scale, always met with some resistance. But he had come this far by confronting challenges head-on, and this would be no different. "We need to address this directly," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Schedule a meeting with the leadership team. I want to make it clear that this is non-negotiable. We're not just talking about numbers or quotas, we're talking about fundamentally changing the way we operate and what we stand for." His assistant nodded, already moving to set the meeting in motion. The CEO knew this moment would be pivotal. The company had already made great strides, but now it was time to put those words into action. The meeting was set for the following week, and as the CEO prepared, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had led him here. From the early days when he had struggled to even be seen as a legitimate contender in the business world, to the moment he had canceled the $50 billion merger, to this very day when he was now leading an industry-wide transformation, it had been a long and challenging road. But each setback had only fueled his resolve, and now, his leadership was being tested in new and unexpected ways. On the day of the meeting, the room was filled with the company's top executives, some of whom had worked with the CEO for years, while others were new to the organization, brought in to help drive the change he was envisioning. As they all settled into their seats, the CEO stood at the front, his presence commanding yet welcoming. He looked around the room, taking in the faces of those who would be instrumental in shaping the future of the company. "I know change isn't always easy," he began, his voice steady and confident, "but it's necessary. What we're doing here, what we're creating, is something that will have a lasting impact, not just on this company, but on the entire industry. And I want each and every one of you to understand something. This is a mission. We're not just checking boxes. We are fundamentally reshaping the way businesses operate, from the top down." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "If you're not on board with that, then now is the time to speak up," he continued, his tone unwavering. "But if you are, then I need your full commitment. This is the future, and we are going to build it together." The room was silent for a moment, and then one of the executives spoke up, a seasoned leader who had been with the company for over a decade. "We support the initiative," he said, his voice carrying a sense of determination. "We understand the importance of what you're doing, and we're ready to make it happen." The CEO nodded, a slight smile appearing on his face. "That's what I want to hear. Let's make this vision a reality." With that, the meeting shifted into a strategic planning session, and the groundwork for the company's transformation was officially laid. The CEO had made it clear that this was a defining moment, and there was no turning back. As the meeting concluded, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was not just about business, it was about building a legacy that would change the world, and with each step forward, he knew he was one step closer to making that legacy a reality. The days following the strategic meeting were filled with a palpable sense of urgency as the CEO's team began to roll out the first stages of the diversity initiative. Changes that had once been met with skepticism from certain quarters were now gaining traction, and the CEO could feel the momentum building, even as the pushback from a few key figures still lingered. However, he was no stranger to resistance. He had faced it at every turn throughout his career, and it only fueled his determination to prove his vision was not just possible, but necessary. He knew this was the moment to solidify his legacy. This was not just about business deals and mergers. It was about dismantling the deep-seated biases that had kept many from even getting a seat at the table. For too long, power had been concentrated in the hands of a few, and the CEO was set on breaking that cycle. The media continued to buzz about his rise, with each new announcement adding fuel to the fire. Yet, the CEO remained unfazed. He had learned long ago that public perception could be both a tool and a weapon, but it was the substance behind his actions that would leave a lasting impact. As he stood in front of his board, his gaze sweeping across the room, he knew that his commitment to diversity and inclusion was not just a corporate initiative, it was a movement that would ripple throughout every industry, and his company would be at the center of it. "What we're doing here is changing the very fabric of this industry," he began, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had fought for. "This is about setting a new standard for what leadership looks like. It's about showing the world that talent, drive, and vision don't come in a one-size-fits-all package. Our strength lies in our diversity, and that's what will make us unstoppable." His words echoed in the room, and for the first time in a long while, the executives present seemed to truly understand the magnitude of the CEO's vision. This was more than just a business strategy. It was a cultural revolution. The CEO had known all along that the success of his plan would depend on one key factor: the willingness of those in power to recognize that the future of business was not about maintaining control, but about empowering others to share in that success. He turned to his chief diversity officer, who had been quietly listening. "How are we progressing with the leadership changes?" he asked, his tone steady but curious. The officer responded with a smile, one that spoke of confidence and pride. "We've already begun reshaping the team. The first round of leadership appointments has been made, and we're seeing a shift in how people are approaching their roles. There's a renewed sense of purpose among our new leaders. They understand that they're not just filling positions, they're changing the way we operate, the way we think." The CEO nodded, satisfied but not complacent. "Keep pushing," he said. "This is just the start. We're going to lead by example, not just in the numbers, but in the culture we create. Every decision we make from here on out will reflect that vision. We're here to stay, and we're here to change the game." The room was silent for a moment, and then, one by one, the executives nodded, ready to take the next step in this bold new direction. For the CEO, this moment marked the culmination of years of struggle, sacrifice, and vision. He had broken through barriers, not just for himself, but for countless others who had been overlooked and sidelined. Now, as the world watched, he was building something that would last far beyond his own legacy. It would be a company and a movement that would transform industries, set new standards, and prove that true leadership is defined by those who uplift others, not by those who cling to power. The CEO stood tall, the weight of the moment settling over him, knowing that what he had set in motion could never be undone. The future was his to shape, and he would do so with the kind of unwavering resolve that had brought him this far.